varying ways. We do have some similarities, but there's no common look, right? I can't really tell you this is what you need to look for to see a student who is affected by COVID. And so what I'd like to do today really is just talk about the universal condition of mental health. We all have mental health in some way, in some level, in some, strength and weakness and all those kinds of things, but we all have mental health. And so I think about how we can really think about that holistic mental health. We can talk today about really concentrating on how to just bolster our students and support them, all of them, regardless of what they're going through. Because with that 89% statistic, first of all, we pretty much know they are all going through this, but we also have the opportunity to really bring it into focus that we're all experiencing this difficult thing. Rather than looking for just particular people, let's just try and sort of normalize that this is a difficult experience. An analogy that I heard in one of the meetings that I went to was, imagine if you knew a couple of your students had come in from the parking lot and had hurt themselves, right? So they come into the parking lot and said, oh my gosh, I fell in the parking lot and broke my leg. Okay, so the first time you're going to go, oh my gosh, let's get you to the hospital. The second time a student comes in and says, I just fell in the parking lot and broke my leg, we're probably going to start thinking about, oh my gosh, what's going on in the parking lot, right? We're not just going to continue to refer people to the hospital for their broken leg. We're going to look for a cause that's going on in the parking lot, and what can we do to sort of mitigate that danger? How can we carefully inspect that and prevent this? So I would propose a new goal then. So instead of really just trying to identify the students who we know, seem to be struggling in class, can we also think about and talk about just making a culture change where we recognize and we talk in class and amongst each other about all aspects of mental health? Not just during a crisis, because that's not a culture change, right? We have to start it during a crisis because that's what we're in. But what I'd like to do is really just have you think about kind of adjusting your mindset here, and not a focus on just identifying people and directing them to treatment, but a true focus on just talking about mental health and normalizing the experiences that we're having and finding commonality and connection with our students. So the main focus that I'd like to have today is how can we create this caring and productive classroom, caring and productive communities and learning spaces where students can thrive. And thrive is a big word, right? But that's why they're here, right? They're trying to make a change in their lives. They're not here because, they want to just kind of have a little, taste of something. My gosh, they're going to college, right? In the time of a pandemic. And so what can we do to really help them have this big change, be a success in their life that they have taken this big risk to do? So before I jump into that, is there anybody who wants to comment on anything or ask a question? I want to, since I can't really see y'all and what you're doing, give a little break here in case anybody wants to chime in. Okay. So people who do research on college student retention generally show that college students perform better when they are connected with their university and when they feel a sense of belonging. So this is largely the reason why we have student clubs, why we have ASISU, why we have activities, why they do bingo, why they have dances and magicians and all those kinds of wonderful activities that unfortunately is looking a lot different, and where we can't really have an opportunity, or our students don't have an opportunity to partake in a lot of that anymore. Also though, on commuter campuses like ISU, or I would propose in the College of Technology, we often have a majority of students who don't live on campus, who might be older, who have families, who are probably working during their hours that they're not in school. And so they really aren't able to avail themselves to a lot of those more traditional kinds of college experiences anyway that would foster that sense of belonging. So yesterday there was a town hall called Student Engagement or Faculty Engagement or something like that. But in that town hall, they talked about how in the absence of these other experiences, the burden, and that's kind of a big word, but I think it's true, the opportunity maybe, if we want to look at the positive side of it, really comes to the classroom. If students aren't able to engage well with their friends or in other places on campus or go to activities or go to bingo, those kinds of things, what they really have is the connection to their classroom is about the only thing they have to really help them feel the sense of belonging in college. And they need that sense of belonging to be successful. And so when we talk about connection to the classroom, what we're really talking about when we synthesize that down is connection to their faculty, connection to the other students in that classroom. But it really boils down to, in this whole big university, what we really need is students who feel connected to the people that they interact with every day, which is you and which is the people in their classroom. And so when we're talking about connection, and I kind of want that, I guess, just to be the buzzword for today, how do we connect with our students? We are really talking about that sense of belonging that we know that if we don't foster, it's so much likelier that they're not going to make it through their program. They're not going to persist. They're not going to be academically successful, and they're not going to come back and complete their program. So I think I saw Mike ask for sort of some specific ways to have conversations, and that is totally, we are going to talk about that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just practical approaches that you can implement every single day in your classroom to build this connection. Just ways of being, ways of talking, ways of interacting that you can add to what you're doing or do more of. Some of these things, hopefully you are already doing, but I would like to submit that in this time, we need to do more of these things. We need to step these things up that we know work already and do them more often, do them bigger, do them in ways that we maybe never have before. So the first thing, and this is where I hope you'll just, if something connects with you, just jot it down. And, if you incorporate one or two things from what we talk about today, I'm going to feel pretty successful. So the first thing I think you can do is you can normalize that you are someone that they can talk to, and that they are probably going to have a need to talk to someone. So when your students show up on those very first few days of class, you can tell them, explicitly say, this is a hard time, right? We're going to school in a pandemic here, and we understand that that brings a lot of challenges besides the challenges of this classroom, all these other things. I know that, and I get it. And when that happens to you, not if that happens to you, because we pretty much know it's a when. So when that happens to you and those circumstances come up, you can talk to me. And I think that sometimes we think that's implied. I think we think that we are there and we're there every day and we're interacting with students. And so of course they can come and talk to us. And I think that implication sometimes is not fully understood by our students, or more importantly, it's not fully felt. I think they have to feel that sense of safety and that open door that only comes from us talking about it first. I remember when I was a kid, and I've been thinking so hard about whether to give this example or not, but when I was a kid, my parents had this idea that there were certain things that they didn't really want to bring up to me, but they would always be an open door, right? When I came to ask them questions about these things, they would talk to me, but they didn't want to open that door because they didn't want to put thoughts in my mind, or they didn't want, to kind of go somewhere where I wasn't ready to go. But when I look back on that, guess how many times I ever asked questions about those things? Absolutely zero, right? Because I didn't have a frame of reference to feel that comfort that it was going to be okay, that safety if I did. And so when we explicitly say, hey, I'm a person you can talk to and I know it's going to get hard, you are opening that door in ways that don't happen just by you showing up in front of them. We had a statement on mental health in the syllabus that we put out last year, and actually I recognize now that was something I was going to have prepared to have Ange put in the chat, and I didn't do that. So I can we sent it out through computers last fall, and I think we can do that again. It's not really updated so much for the pandemic, except to say that we're Zooming our counseling. But I think a statement on mental health services in your syllabus is a great idea to have there, to just let students know that you are supportive of their mental wellness. You can talk about the ways that you're caring for yourself. We talked about all the different ways that we have commonalities. If you are feeling isolated from your family and that's hard on you, hearing that experience is going to help your students. If you have a way that you've connected with your parents or someone who you're unable to see right now and you want to share that story, positive stories are going to help with your students. So stories are so powerful. That's one thing that was a big part of the class that I took in the fall, is stories are so powerful to help connect us and help that common humanity come out. So if you have a story from your life that you feel comfortable sharing with your students, please do, because that will help them connect to you. So when you see students are struggling, some of those behaviors that you've chatted in the beginning, check in with them. Let them know, hey, I've noticed that your test grade went down a little this time, or I've noticed that your assignment was late. How are you doing? Or I noticed that you're not coming to class. And oftentimes, what are people going to say when you say, how are you doing? Fine. Yeah, I saw some of you that I can see sort of lip sync say fine, because that's what we say, right? That's our culture and that's our tradition, is we just say fine. And we certainly just say fine to this authority figure who we don't know very well maybe, and is asking us how we're doing. And it's risky to say something besides fine. So then what you can do is you can follow it up with an open-ended question, right? Instead of how are you doing, which seems like it could be an open-ended question, but we're so conditioned and cultured to say fine, you can follow it up with, what's been hard for you this semester? Or tell me a little bit about how going to school online has changed things for you. Or tell me what's hardest to you about getting that assignment turned in this way. Ask some kind of open-ended question that digs just a little deeper, not necessarily into their private kind of stuff, because we want to give them an opportunity to kind of go there first. But if you open the door with that kind of open-ended question that just goes a little deeper than how are you doing, you are giving them an opportunity to create that feeling of safety for themselves, and that it's okay to be a little bit vulnerable and let you know how they're doing. When you share a story, I already said that. Oh, the language. So I'd like you to think about the language that kind of brings us together. And this was a great suggestion from Brooke Hurt when I kind of ran my stuff past her. And Brooke said, it helps so much when we use language where we kind of orient ourselves to a team. If we talk about we and us versus, I need you to do this. Some more like, we'll be more successful here when we do this, or we're all struggling here. The use of the we and us is going to help create that teamwork sort of idea and that commonality of, yes, we are in this together and we do have some of the same struggles. And then my last suggestion here is really to keep the talk up all the way through the semester. So I know that sometimes we have a tendency to do the dump in the beginning of the class and think, I've now covered this, right? I've mentioned mental health one time and I've told you where, to go to CND, or I've talked about disability services or that kind of thing. And so I don't need to do that again. And I would really just like to submit that if we're making a culture change, we need to have these conversations frequently, maybe every week, maybe a little bit every day, maybe a check-in. If we're going to have a culture change of openness and of connection, it really can't just, because we all expect it to happen on that first day. So it really can't just be that first day and then end. Because as your student, I'm going to give you personally, anyway, my way of approaching the world is to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume you're a good person, but you're going to convince me of that a whole lot more if you keep talking about these things, if you keep bringing them up, and if you keep, it's going to also feel way more normal to me to actually come and tell you that I'm struggling if we've been talking about struggles, or if you've been saying, you know, I think sometimes too, we can do this by talking about things that happen outside. Now, I know all of this cuts away from your time in your classroom, and I want to be very sensitive to the fact that you're all instructors and I'm not. And so I get that everything I tell you to do takes away from instructional time. But I would really like to submit that if you take a couple of minutes processing, say, you know, what happened yesterday, which may, in the capital, which may be hugely increasing our students' anxiety, you are actually buying yourself more time where they're going to be able to listen to your instructional content, because you have taken that little bit of time to help them relax, help them let go of some of that, help them know they're in a safe place right now. Yeah, you know, things might be pretty upsetting from what happened yesterday. Right now, you know, we're in this electronics classroom and I am here for you and we are going to muddle through this together. I wanted to, somebody said something about how they always say fine, and I think that that is so absolutely true. And so I guess what I propose is find a question besides how are you doing, maybe even the skip how are you question, right? Maybe go just straight to a question that is not so culturized. I don't think that's a word, but anyway, we're not so used to saying fine. Find a new question, find a new way to interact so that they don't have that fine just to go to. Ange and Courtney, anything in the private chat that we want to?
I just received a comment from someone. He said, I noticed that my students work less with each other in groups on homework and lab assignments. Working in groups has been very effective in the past for student learning, but I believe because of social distancing, this aspect of student learning has become less effective.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is true. When I see that question, as a total introvert, you know, group work was always hard for me. So now I'm like, oh, yay, we won't have to do as much group work, right? But I totally respect what you're saying, that in the past, that's been an effective way to use the student learning in your classroom. And so that may not be. And I think we have to just bring up the point that sometimes the techniques that you have used in the past maybe aren't going to work now. They did, I know, some cool instructional stuff in the previous Zoom that we had. So hopefully there was something in there to help. I think the breakout rooms are, the class that I had in the fall, we did have to do a group project, and the breakout rooms worked out pretty well on that. It's probably harder at this point maybe to do group work in person. And so if anybody has suggestions on that, I think it would be great to offer up in that area, because it is a struggle. Dawn says, is there anything on your mind today? Is a great question. And I think that's a great question too, Dawn. Dawn, what is your usual question though? That I never know, like I want to answer something funny to, and I can never think of anything.
He asks, what's good today?
No, that's not, is it? What's the something today?
He says, what's the good news?
What's the good news? Yeah, the news. What's the good news today? Yeah. And I'm always like, I don't know, same old boring life, Dawn. I can't think of anything. So I don't know, Dawn, does that question work well with your students, or do you like that? Anything on your mind today?
Well, and it depends on the circumstance. I ask it a lot around meeting people one-on-one, you know, because then I try not to use the same question every day in class. Sometimes sometimes I do have a standard open because, like in a lot of other pieces of our life, a little bit of ritual can be a good thing.
Mm.
So I have a couple of ritualistic openings, and the students can feel, yeah, we're in class, we know where we are.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think that's a great point of bringing that sort of safety into, yep, here's the place that we're going to go ahead and start with Dawn's ritual questions.
Yeah, and so I say, good morning, and I'll have a comment about the weather. And it just kind of, and sometimes the answers are not all the, sometimes we'll get comments about the weather if students are dispersed in remote learning.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you're going to have actual interesting answers maybe that aren't exactly what's going on right here in Pocatello. One thing I want to say about Dawn's what's the good news question is I struggle with coming up with some good news and what to say to Dawn, but what does happen almost every single time is Dawn and I stop for a second in the hallway and chat a minute. And that would likely not happen, and I don't think it happens near as often as when someone just walks by me and says, how are you? And I say, fine. But because Dawn says that, what's the good news? And I sit there and try and think of something, I end up stopping and Dawn and I chat for a second. And so regardless of whether I ever think of what's the good news, he and I have had a little moment of connection there. And that's what I notice happens with that question when he asks it to me.
Mike Matusik just had a really insightful comment. He said, when we first went to remote learning in spring 2020, most of us were just trying to help students get through the final stretch of the semester. We had the mindset that we wanted to help them succeed without overwhelming them. Now that this is the new normal for the time being, I think we've strayed away from that mindset a bit. Our courses should be rigorous, but students are still getting used to blended learning. 2 semesters does not make a student an expert in online learning.
That is a really great point. We do feel like, because I think maybe we are fatigued of this, I do think that sort of contributes to the idea, well, we know it all, I think that's a great point that it still does bring some extra fatigue and stress. There was another really good point regarding rigor in the town hall yesterday that I wrote down the quote. I don't know exactly who said it, maybe someone who was there who can remember, but the person said, it might have been Rick, expectations of rigor go hand in hand with connection. And so when you are incorporating practices and when you are practicing strategies that build connection and foster those relationships, you are also putting in place the ability to expect and have students perform for extra rigor. And so I think maybe in the past we've had the idea that if we spend time on this touchy-feely stuff, right, then students are gonna have the expectation that they don't have to be rigorous. And that connected with me well yesterday, that those things really go hand in hand and we need one to have the other. So I want to move into just a little bit of how to communicate with students, what to do when they do, if they do talk to you, right? Or if they do respond to you, how can you have the communication practices that are going to build connection? And so first thing I want to propose is active listening. Active listening is a real kind of a counselory thing, but it works well in friendships and relationships and marriages. And the idea on active listening is that we are giving some body language, that we're paying attention, which is a little harder on Zoom if we're Zooming, right? So we really have to do it a little even more if we have a mask on, but we're asking questions to clarify. We're being curious. We're taking what the student says face value, right? We're not making judgments about what they say. We're listening to what they say, not because we're trying to think of how can I, what am I going to say? But we're actually just really listening. I think in our society before the pandemic, we had a real absence of people who really just listen to us. And that feels, when you find somebody who does, that feels really good. And you can be that person. I would request that you be maybe a little more accessible than you've been in the past. One thing that when I'm having individual counseling sessions with students, some of the most common frustrations come out that they just can't ever talk to the their instructors. Now that I recognize that's completely one-sided, but it feels very frustrating if you are needing help or needing clarification and you can't get a hold of someone who can help you with that. So be as accessible as you can, and we'll talk about some particulars of how to do that. But those conversations are often going to happen in private. So I think, what Don talked about with his sort of group check-in is a great way to go. But we also have to have one-on-one conversations for real connection to happen. And especially with people who are Zooming, I guess they could chat you privately, but again, that's a little bit hard when you're teaching for you to get that or for you to have a connection. But especially in I think the situation that we're in, the opportunity to have one-on-one conversations becomes even more important. I would just really say communication, communication, and more communication in lots of different ways. Whatever worked for you in the past, incorporate it more and do it more and add to it and bring in new things. Some really great suggestions that I heard, a bunch of these came from Jen Brunfield the other day. She said they text in their department. They've added kind of some urgent ways for students to get a hold of them. So not just, this is when I'm available, but if you really need me, this is how to get me at certain times. Offering a way to get more urgent replies from their email, maybe certain times that you are always on. Having a Google Hangout. This also came from the faculty engagement yesterday. Karen Appleby said that she used to have a Zoom online office hours, and she said nobody came. So she may still do that for all I know, but she said the new thing, so right, the communication, and add new things. The new thing she has added is a Google Hangout, and I can't remember if she said right before or right after class, but they just seamlessly had this Google Hangout attached to their Zoom class, and she said people came. So seemingly doesn't, seem a whole lot different than Zoom office hours, but that little change made a big difference, and people showed up. I think that we have this sort of common idea in teaching that we can't handhold too much, or, we can't babysit students. They're college students, for heaven's sake. So, they should be able to handle these things, and we should be able to just give them information one time and then they follow it, or even multiple times, right? And I just want to propose the idea that times are different. Right? We have the idea, I think I sit in on a lot of TAC meetings, and in TAC meetings we talk a lot about professionalism. And sometimes I think we get the idea that if we don't treat students exactly the way here, that they're going to be treated in employment, we're doing them a disservice. But I really don't think those two environments exactly equate. I think especially during a pandemic, we can have some policies that encourage and offer more support, and students are still going to be okay when they go out into employment, but they've got a better chance to actually complete their program and get out to employment. One of the people I talked to about giving this presentation was Mike Matuzik, who's already offered some really great feedback in the chat, but I want to talk a little bit about some specific things that he told me that he did last semester that worked really well. And Mike said he was maybe going to be engaged with a kid at home today, so I'm going to give the feedback from Mike. But he said that he kind of had this idea where he couldn't give students too much hand-holding, or they weren't going to be ready for jobs. And he said this last semester he just kind of threw that idea out the window and recognized students were going to need more communication in order to be successful. And so previously, where he maybe would only give information in his classes about instructions or deadlines or important information like once a week, this last semester in fall, he said he started the practice of really just making announcements every day, whether it was a major or a minor announcement. He talked at the beginning of every day about what was coming up, conveying information, also reminders. He said he's viewed this as not only helping students know what they needed to know, but helping them know he cared about their success. Right? So the more I talk about what you have coming up, the more you know that I'm invested in you actually being successful in it. Mike says that last semester he emailed all his students twice a week about upcoming deadlines and what expectations he had for correctly turning in assignments. So this is how you can be successful in this assignment. He included in his course syllable an instructor contact policy. This is kind of what I was talking about before, where he clearly stated, these are the times that I routinely check my email. This is the time that you're not going to get an answer. If you email me after 8 p.m., you're probably not going to get an answer till the next day. But I routinely check my email, you know, whatever it is, during these times after work. He also let him know if you really need an urgent reply, this would be the best way to reach out to me. Whenever a student didn't show up into a Zoom classroom or into an in-person classroom or missed an assignment deadline, Mike says he reached out immediately to let him know that he noticed that they were missing and to let them know what they can now do to catch up. Mike said most of the time when he did that, students just said, oh, shoot, I overslept or I had a conflict or whatever, and it was not a big deal. But he still conveyed that message of, I care about you and I noticed you, and we now have that connection. He said sometimes, though, it was a student who was sort of feeling some burnout and maybe was on that slippery slope to deciding it didn't matter enough or that they had too much going on in their life. And so when he did this, he gave an opportunity to give that little boost of confidence or that little bit of encouragement and that connection to say, hey, I care about what's happening to you here and I'm here to help you. And then he said, maybe most importantly, and I wouldn't have thought about this point without Mike telling me, but he said he did it for every single student. And I think sometimes we tend to kind of give up, you know, when we see a student who we think isn't engaging very well or maybe is not on our minds as much. We might maybe let that one slide. You know, I'm not going to contact that student because I don't think there's a whole lot of point. But Mike said he was really as careful as he could be to hold this policy for every single student. And then speaking of accountability, the other thing I really love that Mike said is he held himself really accountable for these policies. He let his students know about them. And then when he messed up for whatever reason, if he had a lapse in what he had promised to do or he had a miscommunication, he apologized. More communication, right? He communicated about the communication problem. And that builds, for me, I don't know that there's anything that builds more communication between me and the people in my life than when I feel like I've kind of been wronged and I receive an apology. It's just huge. So I would like to suggest today that we pay a lot of lip service to anxiety and to increasing mental health and to helping students. But unfortunately, it happens in the trenches and it happens in these communication efforts, and it happens in really taking extra of whatever we've been doing or adding some new things on. Yesterday in the engagement town hall, there was what I thought was a really great document shared. It's on Google Drive right now. I think it used to be housed on the ISU website somewhere, but it had a 404 broken link when they put it in, so they moved it to a drive. So I'm just going to put that in the chat, and it's called Strategies to Create Connections in the Classroom in the First 4 Weeks. So it's just a list of about 20 or 30 suggestions that you can do to immediately create connections with your students, and it gives you an opportunity to kind of rate yourself for how much you're incorporating these, and then really see how much it is, that's a part of your teaching and what you can incorporate. Okay, so we've got about 13 minutes. I don't know, am I supposed to end, Courtney, earlier than 12?
You can end whenever you're wrapped up. Okay.
Okay, so I want to give a few suggestions about sort of the types of communication that's really helpful in building connections. We talked about sharing with a student that you've noticed some behaviors. I want to talk about validation. We talked a little bit about active listening. I can't think of a worse experience that I have had in my life than when I have been vulnerable and I have shared something kind of scary, an internal part of me with someone else, and I've been shut down, or I've been invalidated, or I've felt like I've been brushed off. There just probably isn't a lot of worse communication experiences, I think, than we can have that. So some validating, easy validating statements you can make when a student shares a concern with you is, I can see why you feel that way, or that really makes sense, or thanking them for sharing. And I appreciate that you trusted me with this. What can we do now? Right? So some kind of a statement that validates their experience, that you understand it and you get them. Avoiding the judgment. Don't tell them, you know, if you'll only do this, or so-and-so does it this way and it works a whole lot better, or if you would only focus on the right thing, right? At that point, they just really need you to listen. And I think we live in the West, in the United States, and boy, we just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we suck it up and we should be able to handle things. And I, as a counselor, one of the first things I do when I am talking to a student about having a disengagement problem in the classroom or some sort of personal thing going on in our life, I say, have you let your instructor know? And it's a scary, scary thing for them to do that. They feel like they're oversharing, and they feel like you're maybe not going to be always empathetic to them. And so it's a really scary thing. And I have had students that I've encouraged to do that, and they've come back and said, yeah, my instructor said, suck it up. Right? And that just doesn't help. So don't minimize, don't compare, do listen, do validate, do reflect their statement. Remember, when students come to you on top of the COVID stress, they may be experiencing hunger or poverty. All of our students all the time, right? This is pre-pandemic. We faced a lot of these situations with students who didn't know if they had housing security. So in that situation, we have wonderful resources here on campus to refer. We have disability services, and sometimes I think it's important to recognize that students who have anxiety or depression, or that's manifesting, they may have that actually as a documented disability. So that's another thing I always incorporate into my counseling is if I am talking to someone who's talking frequently about anxiety or depression, I say, can I help you get connected to disability services? I want you to be able to have people who understand this and how it's going to impact your learning. It's always great to refer them to C&D as their first stop, because we will get them to these other services. If that feels too uncomfortable for them, the Dean of Students is another option. If you can get them referred to Stephanie Foreman down on Lower Campus, Stephanie will get them into Benny's Pantry. She's got some assistance money for emergency kinds of monies. That's the link that Ange just put in the chat. Again, at this point at CND, we are Zooming, and so we would love to have students call us to make an appointment. We'll talk to them over the phone, or we'll set up a Zoom, we'll connect with them, we'll get them to resources to make sure. Sometimes it's community resources that they need to get to. But we realize that sometimes the anxiety is manifesting itself because of another problem or another issue that can be going on in their life. Oh yeah, Susan references the University Health Center. I absolutely refer people to the University Health Center for, sometimes their mental stuff, their mental health issues can be physically related, and they also, like Susan said, do a great job with mental health too. We want you all to know that this is kind of a narrow category, but Center for New Directions this year has a lot of money for assistance for students who meet the qualifications of single parent, displaced homemaker, or dislocated worker. And we are trying to get that money out. And so if you know that someone is a single parent, dislocated worker, if they've been laid off, they're a dislocated worker, displaced homemaker, if they've been someone who has been supported by a partner and now no longer is, and so they're coming to school for training so they can support themselves. Those are kind of the definitions of those, but hopefully you'll refer them anyway, just because you know that CND is a great first place to start, and then we can find out whether they would qualify for those kinds of assistance that we have. If a student declines support, if you say, hey, CND is great, let's get you connected with CND, and they say, yeah, no, it's all right, I can handle it. Then at that point, I hope you'll just let them know, hey, okay, I respect you and your choices, yourself best. I'm available when you want to talk. I'm available to help you connect with a counselor or with whoever, whenever you want to do that. Another thing you can do is you can call us. If you have students that you want to consult with, you're concerned about students and you can't get the student to come, give us a call. We do consultations. Call your academic advisor. They're great. And I'm sure that a lot of you have relationships where you do that and you can talk about a student that you're concerned about. This is another gem that came from Brooke the other day. Brooke said, you know, when we are trying to help a student all by ourselves, it can often feel difficult and lonely and kind of isolating. Let's share that load. Let's all partner and collaborate together so that we as one person, one individual, is not really feeling like we have the burden of all of this. We also bring in different perspectives, you know, and that's my favorite thing about collaboration and team building is often my perspective on this thing I'm trying to do is such a small part of what is actually there. And somebody who I collaborate with makes it bigger and makes it better and brings in new things. And we can do that with our students. The last thing I would suggest on that is if you're uncomfortable with these conversations or what students might tell you, get QPR training or Respond training. Go to Counseling and Testing does those trainings. They're doing them now through Zoom, so they're super easy to get to, besides they're a bit of a time commitment. But they're going to help you feel like you don't have to be afraid of being a resource for students to talk to you, because what if they say this? And again, we're available to consult with those kinds of things. So in the last just minute or two, I want to talk about a few course practices that you could have. These were suggested in Active Mind, and I'm just going to throw them out there because I figure these are people who do the research and they know about teaching. One of them, if we're trying to really support mental health, is we can support our students getting sleep. And they suggest we might do that by not setting midnight deadlines for our work. You know, if we're encouraging students to pull all-nighters, through our deadlines, they're probably going to feel more anxious. We can start our classes with just a little break or just a little check-in or a brief moment of mindfulness. One day when I was down in the START classroom doing something, Cherise started with a little bit of 4 square breathing, which I was going to do with you all, but in the interest of time, we won't do that. But if you just, you know, start with a brief moment and say, hey, you know, everybody, let's just check in with kind of our bodies and where we are and put our feet on the floor. And 4 square breathing is where you just kind of breathe around a square and you just imagine that in your head and you breathe in and you breathe out and you breathe in and you breathe out. You do that a couple of cycles and you have brought oxygen to your brain and you have balanced your carbon dioxide and your oxygen to help you have more clarity in your thinking, and you've brought your mind into your class. You could assign self-care practices as homework. You could incorporate that into actually taking care of yourself, and I'll give you some points for it. We want you to know at Center for New Directions, we've got some virtual programming that's going to continue this semester. We've got about every other Monday, where Tavante's doing a Mindful Monday sort of a activity with these kinds of focuses on him. He's doing that at 11 and 12 to hopefully catch the most people he can during their lunch hour. And then Katie and our student employees are doing some great programming that we're calling Lunch and Learn. Again, at 11 and 12 on Tuesdays. We're not 100% sure it's been on Tuesdays. It may change the day, but we always send those out through computers. We send them through student email. We put them on our social media. We advertise those as best as we can. We'd love to see you attend with your class. That would just be amazing. Katie would like fall off her chair if she opened up her Zoom and there were, 28 of you from PTA or whatever. So I want to say one kind of last thing about resiliency. Sometimes we talk about resiliency in our students like it's a character trait. So-and-so is resilient and maybe so-and-so isn't. We think that it sounds like something they're just born with. And I want to encourage you to think about resiliency as a learned skill. Again, rigor's connected to connection. Resiliency is also connected to connection. They go hand in hand with connection. Each time that we provide a developmentally appropriate, challenging experience for our students and they have some amount of success with it, that builds resiliency. Now, the key to that is the support. So developmentally appropriate challenge that we support them in. They have some success or they make a mistake and we make it safe for mistakes and we talk about next time how they will be more successful. So resilience is something that we can foster, we can teach, we can talk about. It's not something that is either there or it isn't there. And connection connection, resiliency, rigor, all of those go together. So it is 11:58. I will end there. Does anybody have anything that you would like to add, or anything that came up in chat, Courtney or Ange, to wrap up?
It looks like Timothy made a comment. I give students an exercise that they do away from class, which causes them to stare out the window. They have to set a timer and just think, and then write about in free form what they thought about. And we do that for them in the semester. We do 4 of them in the semester. Students thought it was weird or silly at first, but many of them began to realize it was helping them with writing. Just having a few minutes helped them and they were less stressed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I love that idea. You know, as someone who is kind of linear thinking, and when I have those free writing assignments, I know that is causing me to engage my brain in a way that I don't usually do, which is such a good thing. Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate everybody's attendance. I hope, like I said, if there were 1 or 2 or 3 things that you got out of today, I'm going to feel like it was time well spent. If you wanted to engage with CND in anything that comes up, we are here for you. That's part of what we do. Our customer service is a huge part and focused on you besides students. So great to see everybody, and have a great start to your semester.